Coming up, manipulative murderesses, skinny slip-outs, living legends, and more. Join us as we have a look at the women who escaped from prison. Number 7. Deborah Gavin. Now, getting out of jail is, by definition, not really an easy thing to do, unless, of course, you're Deborah Gavin. She was put into Georgia's Women's Correctional Institution in 1974 for the charge of armed robbery, but that didn't really stop her from making multiple escapes. She got out and was recaptured again and again and again, until one day when she made it out all the way to Texas. In Frankston, Gavin would change her name, get married, and then have 2 children. A whopping 30 years after her escape, authorities finally caught up with Deborah and arrested her. She claimed that she fled prison due to horrific sexual harassment and rape inflicted by the guards of the institution, and the Georgia's Women's Correctional Institution became an incredible sex scandal in the 1990s, as many women would come forth asserting the same claim. In 1993, the prison was turned into a men's correctional facility. After Gavin shed light on the horrors of the institution, many people wrote letters to the governors of Georgia and Texas, all demanding that Gavin be allowed to live out the rest of her life free from jail and free in the state of Texas. With the amazing amount of media coverage on the scandal, the court did not pursue extradition, and the case would then be closed. Number 6. Squeaky FROMME. Now, sometimes your family can be a good influence on you, and other times, well, they can brainwash you. In the case of Lynette Squeaky FROMME, her family was a bit less morally centered than most. That's because, as one of Charles Manson's most trusted associates, Squeaky was right in the heart of the murderous clan. It would be on a horrific night in 1969 that the Manson family became famous by killing multiple people. But FROMME wasn't there at the scene and was not arrested for the gruesome murders. Squeaky sat through Charles' lengthy trials, camping outside of the courthouse, and when he was firmly convicted, she moved to be with him. Charles Manson was moved from prison to prison in different towns, so Squeaky would also hop from city to city following the head of her family. Then in 1975, she pulled a gun on President Gerald Ford while he was in Sacramento, California. She was then convicted of attempted assassination and sentenced to life in prison. 12 years later, in 1987, FROMME squeaked out and attempted to meet up with Manson as he had been diagnosed with cancer. She was then recaptured and put back into prison until 2009, where she was then granted parole. While this level of dedication might be admirable, you really have to choose your icons wisely. Number 5. The Niantic 5. Breaking out of prison is usually difficult, but there are times when the situation, well, it just kind of fits. In 1984, 5 women would escape from the Niantic Correctional Institution of Connecticut. There was no complicated jailbreak or even an armed hostage situation. Just women who squeezed through the steel bars of the maximum security prison. Now, it was no easy feat though, because the bars were only 7.7 inches apart, and the window was only 15 inches high. The women were slender and quick, and the prison did not have an encircling wall, so they just all made a break for it. Their absence would go unnoticed until a bed check almost an hour later. However, miraculous and easy as the escape was, it didn't last for very long. 2 of the women were caught the day after their breakout, and the other one was caught the day after that. The 4th one lasted an entire week, and then the 5th one turned herself in 10 days after walking out of the prison yard. While we certainly can appreciate that there wasn't any violence involved in this escape, it's just not easy to survive when you're on the run from the law. Number 4. Samantha Lopez. Samantha Lopez was serving a 50-year prison sentence for aiding and abetting an armed bank robbery in Georgia when she found herself in an unlikely situation. That's because she fell in love while serving her time in California with Ronald McIntosh, who was a former Army helicopter pilot who got busted for wire fraud. The incarcerated couple met while working in the business office of the federal prison. In 1986, McIntosh escaped while being transferred to another facility. And for all of you romance fans out there, don't worry, because 8 days later this convicted Romeo returned for his Juliet in a hijacked helicopter. Lopez climbed aboard and the couple escaped and lived happily ever after for an entire 10 days. Sadly for the star-crossed lovers, they were caught while trying to purchase wedding rings, as McIntosh wrote a check from a monitored bank account. The two lovers would be brought to justice, but the system isn't all heartless. They were married shortly after their recapture by a former prison chaplain. Unfortunately, though, the daring escape didn't do much for their chances of early parole. McIntosh would be found guilty of air piracy and aiding in Lopez's escape, sentenced to an additional 25 years. Lopez was then found guilty of her own escape and had 5 more years added on to her sentence. Truly a romantic tragedy. Number 3. Marie Walsh. Successful friends and neighbors can be wonderful pillars in the community, but sometimes they have a whole lot darker secrets than you may think. Marie Walsh lived in an $800,000 home, was married to an executive, used her Lexus to drive her 3 kids to soccer practice. And while it all may sound like the perfect housewife scenario, there was a little bit more going on in Walsh's life. When U.S. Marshals would knock on the door and demand to know if Walsh was actually an escaped convict by the name of Susan LaFerve, the jig was up. LaFerve had gone by a different name since she had escaped from prison 32 years previous. She had served half of her 20-year sentence for drug charges when LaFerve had had enough. She climbed over the barbed wire fence and ran to a nearby street where her grandfather was waiting in a getaway car. Weeks later, she would hitch a ride to California and begin a brand new and quite successful life. LaFerve would end up admitting her identity and getting 5 years added onto her sentence. The media picked up on the incredible story, and LaFerve admitted that she only used drugs recreationally but had never sold them, as the original charge had stated. When she was first arrested, her attorney had told her to plead guilty in hopes that she would receive a more lenient sentence for being a first-time offender. No such luck, however, because more than 30 years after her escape, her attorney would ask the judge to throw the case out due to her success in life, along with her law-abiding nature for the intervening decades. This time around, the judge was a whole lot more helpful and gave her a 2-year parole for the escape, and the Michigan Parole Board would vote unanimously to overturn the initial drug charges, claiming that she was doing what they had hoped all offenders would do upon release, which was to live a crime-free and successful life. Sometimes things work out, and though it's a rare occasion, there are times when breaking out of prison can be the best decision you make. Number 2. Sarah Jo Pender. Love between convicts can be, well, if not harmless, at least not terrible. Other times, 2 strangers can meet and it could lead to something straight out of a horror movie. Sarah Jo Pender met a drug dealer by the name of Richard Hull outside of a concert in 2000, and the two would strike up a relationship. They ended up sharing a house with some roommates in Indianapolis. One morning, Pender went to Walmart and bought a 12-gauge shotgun, and then later that evening, Richard would use it to brutally murder their 2 roommates. Pender was away at the time of the double murder, but she came back to a house full of bodies and soaked in blood. She then helped her boyfriend to wrap the bodies up in blankets and put them into his truck, where they then dropped off the corpses into trash bins. Pender went on to work the next day, as if nothing had ever happened, later claiming that she was scared that she would be her boyfriend's next victim. 2 days after the murder, Hull would be arrested, and the day after that, Pender would be arrested. A year after their respective trials, information would begin to leak out that Pender was actually the criminal mastermind of the situation, and that she had manipulated Hull into killing their roommates. She would be labeled the female Charles Manson, sentenced to 110 years in prison. However, in 2008, Pender would be able to escape from Rockville Correctional with the help of a guard and her former cellmate. The guard claimed that Pender had manipulated him into driving her out of the prison yard in a van. She was then caught, and both she and the abetting officer are in prison today. Number 1. Limerick. Women escaping prison isn't just a 21st century issue, it's been happening for quite some time. At a jail in Limerick, Ireland, 9 women would manage to escape one evening in 1830. All 9 of them were hours away from being taken to another facility when they hatched a plan. Days beforehand, they were equipped with a smuggled file, nitric acid, and a short iron bar. Then on the evening of the escape, they had assistance from 2 men on the outside. These men would use ladders that were left by repairmen to scale the 3 walls that surrounded the prison, and then were able to easily access the women's yard. The next part was a little bit more trickier, however. Their job was to smash the locks on the cells, and it wasn't going to be a silent escape. However, things were a little more conducive to noisy getaways back then. That's because in the evenings at this particular jail, the inmates would join together to loudly sing hymns, and as you might imagine, most of the prison was very excited by the attempt. As such, the singing was particularly loud, and the locks were successfully broken. The women slowly escaped one by one, climbing over the 3 walls using the ladders that were left by their conspirators. Incredibly though, one of the women escaped with her young infant son, and after the women made it to the 3rd wall, they bade each other farewell and then disappeared into the pages of history. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and leave a like and a comment on this video so that you get more in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.